Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with yet another episode of the Artists Index podcast, the In Focus podcast. And today, I believe we've already recorded, I think, close to 170 pieces. This recording day, we just dropped our 158th podcast. But I think that this may be No, I'm wrong. It was James Bobrick was our first poet. So rather than have him, the voice in the wilderness, he's going to have company now. And I'll let our guests introduce themselves. And they know the routine. Go ahead, guest.
Sure. Hi, my name's Sarah Jane Mulvey. Sarah, S-A-R-A-H. Jane, J-A-N-E. And my last name, Mulvey, M-U-L-V-E-Y.
Okay. Yeah, the whole Sarah thing is like with an H without an H.
It makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. It does. And Mulvey, do people ever screw that up?
On occasion, I get like Mulvey or Mulvaney, which is a more common like surname, but Mulvey.
Mulvey. And I heard that you're the Poet Laureate. I heard you're the Poet Laureate of the city. Could you tell us what that's all about and how you fit into all of this?
Sure. So it is appointed by the New Bedford Arts Council, and I'm a community liaison for the art of poetry. I'm in my second year of a 3-year term. So the process starts over again in January of 25 when my run is over. And let's see, it is an application process. So you send in your portfolio of your work, plus, a little bit about yourself and what do I want to say? Your CV, basically. And the Arts Council looks through applicants, chooses a couple for an interview process, and then you meet with the committee and go through an interview process. And after that, they choose, and you get a cool little appointment ceremony at the city council meeting. So that was a lot of fun. And as I said, it's a 3-year term. And so my duties, I'm not like a city employee or anything like that, but my duties include kind of going to school groups and chatting with students about art. The mayor can ask me to speak at events, and organizations can commission me to write pieces for their events, which I have done a couple times for different organizations. And that's been probably one of the most fun things, is getting to work with these different local arts and community organizations, and help them make their events a little more special.
Yeah, now I was going to joke with you and say, well, you pretty much answered all my questions. I guess we're done. Bye. But what is the purpose of the Poet Laureate? Let's put it into two contexts. What was the purpose of it traditionally, and how has it evolved? Because I'm sure it's not exactly the same way.
Right. I know it is. I'm sure it was like a Greek thing that you had like your appointed poet of the city. But I know it is most commonly like an appointment in the English kind of court, where a person was selected as the Poet Laureate, and that was their job as court poet to, write things about big events, or just something to praise whatever monarch they were working under. And that's also where the tradition of a New Year's poem stems from. So a Poet Laureate traditionally created a poem specifically for the New Year, and that was shared with court and everybody. That's one of the cooler traditions. But basically, Poet Laureate is a community representative for the art of poetry. And so when you hear Poet Laureate, you go, what's that? And so I have to, a friend of mine needed a simpler term. And so I said, it's like a captain, like captain of poetry. And so basically it's to bring that art of poetry down to the more personal level, where you actually see someone engaging in that artwork on a daily basis, and they're in your community, they're standing next to you in the coffee line, and then you see them the next time you see them, they're standing up at the podium reciting their poems. So I think that's really the beauty of it, is that it brings it down to it's a person creating a poem. And so it's not just Robert Frost and Walt Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe in your English textbooks.
Mhm.
It's it's your neighbor, it's the person who works the cash register at your local grocery store could be a poet. And so it used to be quite a high and mighty thing, but it has evolved with these towns appointing various poet laureates, that it is much more of a community based and what I want to say, grassroots thing.
Okay. I mean, it seems like an old hangover from days gone by. And you almost wonder, well, the average person, what's the purpose of it? But before I get into that, I mean, I thought being a painter was something difficult to, and because I can't think of a better term right now, was a difficult thing to defend. Because a lot of people are like, what? You make a living doing that? In our culture, well, American culture is almost an oxymoron. And
To put it lightly.
and so being a painter and having been an abstract painter for most of my life, and I like the concept of the old Greek, the old Maine headset, where tourists ask this gentleman while they're visiting Maine, "Have you lived here all your life?" And he says, "Not yet." But anyway, so spending most of that time as a painter, abstract painter, which now makes it even more dubious. Like, really?
Right.
I don't understand that. I would have to go back to school. Yada yada. Now I think poetry is probably just as, again, for lack of a better term, just as bad, if not more difficult, to try to explain your purpose. What do you think of that?
Yes and no. I think it really just it brings to mind how badly we shun it in our education system, because poetry has been a factor in governments and and community organizing, activism. It's been part of those processes since tribal times. That's how you shared history. That's how you shared. Oh, excuse me, this is Morgan.
Hey, Morgan, we just had a cat walk in.
Makes yourself well known. Say hi.
It's
Sorry
like,
about
yeah,
that.
I'm out of here.
But yeah, I mean, your poet was the keeper of your oral history. And then once we got into, our more siloed versions of society, and it became an academic thing, and more of a artistic pursuit as opposed to just a communal need. I think that's where it stems off. So now that we're kind of all focused on getting a degree, getting a good paying job, getting capitalism and fueling that kind of whole thing, yes, it does become very difficult to defend spending time writing poetry. It also becomes very hard to defend how you can write at times like this.
Mhm.
In a society like this. Like, what is there to write about when you're working all the time and fighting for your existence at this point, fighting to maintain some semblance of normal life. How do you write poetry? How do you waste your time? And I think that comes from the poetry education we've been given, where it's more academic and more cerebral than the actual art of poetry needs to be. Poetry needs to be about everyday life, about everyday existence, and experiences. And so once you give someone a poet that they fall in love with, they get it. So it's just finding that, like, it's finding everyone their heart poet, as cheesy as that sounds. But when you make suggestions to people, they sometimes take it and then they come back to you and they're like, I read through that whole book in like a week, and I haven't done that since I was a kid. And it's like, yeah, because you found someone who speaks to you. And so now you understand the effect that art can have on you.
Well, you just opened a whole bunch of doors in my head. Number one is that poets almost became the voice of a people, the voice of a city. And it's we refer to slam, which we'll get back to, but in today's jargon, slams. But there was a time where I believe it was one of the Olympic events,
Yes.
where the Poet Laureate of Athens would go up against the Poet Laureate of Sparta.
Mhm.
And there is an intellectual aspect to it. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but has America lost its poetry?
No.
I mean, it's there. I think rap has brought it back. A lot of people don't quite understand rap, but if you take the music away and speak it versus rapping it, doing the rap, I guess, you can tell my age, that people start to get that. And I think that's how there's a crossover from people who aren't used to rap or have prejudices against it. And prejudices come from ignorance as well as, any malfeasance. And then I'm thinking about my own culture, the Portuguese culture. I mean, poetry. I mean, the Portuguese poets. I mean, that is. But I'm almost wondering now. The Portuguese are made of three peoples: the Celts in the north, the Iberians, which are the indigenous people, and the Celtiberians. So the mixture, and then there's the Moors, or the Phoenicians. And I'm almost wondering, did the Portuguese affect the Celts and their poetry, or did the Celts affect the Portuguese? Because the was it the Clancy brothers? The album is called Santiago. They were doing a tour in Europe, and they're playing Irish music, and they ran across something in Portugal, in the north of Portugal. They were almost in Galicia, and they were just floored. It's like, wait a minute, that sounds like way too familiar. They started to go into it, and they found out the roots of Portuguese Celts and Irish Celts are so connected. It's unbelievable. But so now we have the poets, and then my assumption is, and I'm just putting it out there, that the minstrels are basically taking poetry, putting it to music, and now giving it another. So nothing is new.
Right.
We've all gone through different cycles, these different manifestations.
Been experimenting with this art form since the dawn of time, before written language, because that was the only thing we had.
Now, I've in the last couple of years have gotten into what's called socially conscious expressionism, and I'm so pissed. I've got so many, and I'm using that term professionally. I'm so pissed, and I have so many topics that I want to cover with my paintings. Do poets get pissed too?
Oh,
In
absolutely.
fact, this is almost a poem. That's a title of a poem.
Absolutely. I mean, when you said, has America lost its poetry? And I responded very quickly, no. We have a wealth of poets here in America at exactly that topic. Protest poetry has been part of our our cultural experience forever. African American poets have held that ground down for decades. The civil rights movement and that sort of style of like Martin Luther King did it best, I guess. That sort of preaching, but also poetry and speech. Maya Angelou, for instance, is a perfect example of that. James Baldwin, who, he was usually giving essays and speeches, but he was a poet in his own right. Those people have held down the American poetry world for decades. And it's exactly that socially conscious, righteous anger. And it carries the history carries over into modern poetry. And some voices are of course stronger than others, and some are more fearful than others, but I think most of the poetry you see now, especially in the slam scene, it has to have that social element to it. That's part of the art of slam poetry, is having that social justice element to it. And it's thriving. I mean, there's poetry slam teams right here in New England. There's multiple. There's out of Boston, out of Rhode Island, New Hampshire. Just within our little bubble here on 95, you can find at least 3 or 4. And then Emerson College has their own slam team. Like it's a competitive international experience at this point. I am terrible at it. I'm not a slam poet. I am a page poet, but I try really hard. And but I can't understate how important that scene is to American poetry, because it is exactly that social justice and community organizing and activism based poetry.
So slam poetry is pretty much spoken poetry versus page poetry, which is pretty much written and read, quietly.
Right. Well, that's the cool crossover that we have now, that you can absolutely perform your page poem. But there is an element to slam poetry that is wildly, over the top performative, and loud and expression based. And so if you go into a slam and you read in that sort of like poetic, like, stopping by the woods on a snowy evening, blah, 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 like, you're not going to win. You've got to use your hands. You've got to use your face, your body. And you have to take up space and make people look at you, and make people listen to you. And, it's a careful art, because I'm sure you can overdo it sometimes, and people are like, whoa. Hang on.
Dial it back a little bit.
Yeah. But I have yet to see that. I have been blown away by some live slam poets, and just, you can't get them out of your head. When you see a performance like that, you can't get it out of your head.
So there are vestiges of it everywhere. I mean, unless you've been to a live Black Baptist church, and you've got this back and forth. It's call and response. So you have so many of these elements of cultures, of African culture, of other cultures coming in, and it's kind of a shame that people don't see those crossovers, don't see this under the umbrella of poetry. You have all of these subsets in there. Amanda Gorman obviously got everybody pricking up their ears. She came in at the right place, the right time, with the right poem.
Oh, yes.
And now she's almost become a mouthpiece, so to speak, which I guess goes back to, as you said earlier, that was the original intent. It's either you're delivering, on the New Year poem, the aspirations for the new year, or you are in protest. So I'm thinking, I mean, all of a sudden, all these crazy things like debate teams, lawyers in courtrooms, And then one of my favorite writers is Mark Stewart. Mark Stewart is the leader organizer of Stew and the Negro Problem. They're sort of a fusion rock and roll band, so to speak. But they've also done, I think, 2 Broadway plays. One of them is called The Total Bent, and the other one is called Passing Strange. And I have learned so much by listening to Stew and the Negro Problem about culture, Black culture specifically. And, there's this underlying seething rage and hurt and such. So other than, holding a pansy and putting it gently to your forehead and then waxing poetic about, I'm trying to think about that. What a lovely thing is a tree or something. I can't remember that one. That's so cliche. And that, unfortunately, is what some people only remember from school, and they're like, boring, next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, as a middle-class white girl growing up, I can't speak to learning anything outside of what I've read in books of, of our experience, our history. But then you pick up a poetry book from a Black artist and you find it finally, and it in a way that makes sense to you because it is a human experience that this person is sharing. Granted, you will never know what it feels like to be in that poem, but that poet has found a way to express it in words, which you can then read and hopefully take to heart.
Right.
I think that is the power of, that's the power of art in general.
Mhm.
But I think in particular in poetry, when the poet is connecting to the human experience and finding a way to make you listen because you somehow understand, whether that's, for instance, one of my favorite poets, Hanif Abdurraqib, he writes a series of poems that are titled "How Can Black People Write About Flowers at a Time Like This?" And those poems go on and on about, yes, of course, everything is awful right now, but we have to find beauty in it. And for me, as a white person on the other side of that experience, just seeing the news unfold, seeing it happen, it to people on on the internet, the onslaught here, but knowing that I'm somewhat removed from the situation because of my white privilege, my upbringing, my background, that I will never know how that truly feels. But then the poet is telling me, and so I should take it to heart that this is how it feels, because that poet is sharing their experience with me through art. And I think that is it's a great equalizer. It's a great barrier breaker. And if we all just, not to get too kumbaya about it, because clearly there's structural issues and systemic issues. But if we all took a second to share a little more art and to really take that art to heart, there we go. Oh, nice rhyme. I think it would make a world of difference in the way we can change things. Not to get off on a tangent about that, but
no. The other thing too is you said something about you can't expect a person who is not of color to be in the poem or in the skin, because no matter how empathetic, sympathetic, you want to be, no matter how allied you want to be, enlightened, okay, to use the badly used word woke, which is wrong. That's being woke is
it's a good term. No, it is a good term that has turned into a bad term.
Exactly. I mean, basically, it was Black parents telling the kids, your head's on a neck. That means you can swivel, look around, pay attention. In the military, it's called situational awareness. You got to know you know, you got to see it coming before it happens and that kind of thing. But it is about being enlightened. And I don't know what is the problem with not being enlightened. But, you know, the other thing too is, again, you know, abstract painting and poetry in general, and people looking at it and just, you know, there are the people who want to learn so badly, and because they want to learn so badly, they're not allowing themselves to just absorb it, because it's not rocket science. It's not something you have to go to school for. It's imagine, you know, coming from a culture where there was no coffee, and now, you know, like, oh my God, it smells so good, but should I take a sip? I don't know. So basically, for anybody who's nay about the poet laureate of the city of New Bedford or of any other city, hopefully they've been enlightened, and they've learned that, wow, there is a little bit more there than you know, perhaps, you know, even thought about this. We need things. Jay Peterman, who is not just a character on the old Seinfeld show, Elaine's Boss. Jay Peterman was actually a real live catalog person. He created the Jay Peterman catalog, and it was J, the initial, not Jay. He had this little manifesto on the inside cover of every catalog that came out, that basically said, an excerpt from it: when will American business realize that people want things that make their lives the way they wish they were? And I really think that comes down to aesthetics, which then becomes a whole nother, oh my gosh, is it the right term? But there is aesthetics. I mean, it's not taste, like, okay, so look at me, I'm holding my little pinky out as I'm drinking my tea. I've got taste and I've got class. There's a lot more to that. And I'm wondering about, well, slamming, using another version of that term, slamming on education. I'm sure that if you keep in contact with your English instructors that you've had throughout your life, they'll probably want to meet you at a bar to talk about how difficult it is to get poetry across in an exciting way without and all of a sudden there's already a anti-poetry gene or attitude. I don't even know what it is, but I know I don't like it. So what do you get to say to that?
Well, it's also, and this is in no way disparaging educators. I want to make that clear.
Yep.
I have had many teachers who have gone above and beyond to help us learn, but it is the educational system that is failing them, because all anyone needs to learn now is what's on the MCAS or what's on the SAT or what's going to help them ace those standardized tests. And that's the main problem. When you're given the poetry, module, you're asked to analyze all of these poems. You're asked to analyze what Robert Frost was thinking when he wrote this poem. I mean, you're asking children, right? Children, relatively, to analyze the work of Edgar Allan Poe, who was, kind of a maniac adult. Yeah. And you're asking them to analyze this man's heartbreaking, poem about his wife dying. A child is not going to take to that. They're not going to take to analyzing a piece of art. They're going to take to reading that art and seeing how they can play with it and make it their own. And so, when you give kids these heady kind of, big emotion and big idea poems, not that they can't handle it, but you're throwing them in the deep end, you're throwing them to these, old men who wrote these poems in their, upper, 40s, and well, Edgar Allan Poe died quite young, but their older age, with experience and life experience that these kids cannot fathom yet.
They don't have the
So-
emotional maturity to
Exactly.
understand, stopping, in a snowy wood. They're like, I don't even know what the heck that means.
Right. You aren't allowed to walk around on snowy wood by yourself at,
Right.
at 10. Whereas if you give them, and this was an idea, a thought that I had a while ago, I had fantastic. I went to a parochial school from 2nd to 8th grade. I had fantastic teachers, and my high school teachers were great. They did what they could, but I had fantastic teachers. But Mary Oliver, who is one of the best-selling and best loved poets in modern America, I didn't meet her until about 8 years ago when I found her a book of hers. And if I had been given her in my elementary and middle school years, I don't know what my art would be like now, because she is so easy to read. She's so easy to engage with. Her poetry is beautiful, and it's the best one I can give is Wild Geese. Everyone knows, or most people know that one, Wild Geese, and it's you do not have to be good, you do not have to be this, that, and then it's what will you do with your one wild and precious life. And the imagery is just like, it's so simple. Like, yes, I can find beauty in nature, and a child sees beauty in nature, in a different way than an adult does. But if you give that kid permission to write that poem about a beautiful sunset, or about, their cat or something like that, you open the door and say, you can write a poem about anything, and it has artistic value. You don't have to write about the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or the saddest thing that's ever happened to you. Don't hurt yourself to inspire yourself. It's finding the beauty in, again, an everyday human experience, or something as simple as walking outside in the morning and seeing flowers. That's poetry, and you write about that. I think we do a disservice when we throw these kids big heavy poems, when we could give them something light and beautiful and ask them to analyze that, or ask them to replicate that in their own voice. Poetry is experimentation in language, and I think when you present it as something where you have to figure out poetry, it's not possible. It's not possible, because I don't know what was going through that poet's head when they wrote it. I could read something entirely different into that poem based on my experience. So to analyze it takes the magic out of it almost. Whereas if you ask me, if you asked me to read that poem and then write in that vein, like a response poem, basically,
Mm-hmm.
What could I learn from just playing with language, as opposed to?
And it is about language. It's funny because I'm lucky to be multilingual, and especially from the Portuguese side, there are certain words in Portuguese that when I'm in conversation with someone and they're speaking in English, I just pause and it's like, I don't know the English word for that. Because,
Right.
well, I do, but it doesn't carry the weight of this
Right.
Portuguese word.
There's no equivalent. Mhm.
And I think one of the problems with a lot of children is that they're still learning how to communicate. Language, depending on the household, that's where it comes from primarily. So if you are not getting anything beyond, well, the basics of base and basics, let's call it that way, base language and basics, the articulation, and Morgan just wants to hang out with you. Morgan's cat just jumped into Sarah's lap again. Whoop, and he's off again, because cats have their own mind. Which brings me to, I'm gonna get right off that. Can cats be poets?
Cats are poetic inspiration for sure.
Can they be poets? Can they,
they are too destructive.
Because
they are too
I always
destructive
look
to
at
be poets.
my dog, and she's a very, very intelligent, very empathic soul. I don't like calling her a dog. And I put her out in the backyard, and we don't have it's not closed off, so it's on a long lead. She always manages to get tangled up. Yet you see a cat. So I tell her, I said, Daisy, dogs don't know anything about mathematics, no trigonometry, no geometry, but a cat is a completely different thing.
Yes.
You see the cat on the edge of a table or something, and it's looking at something higher that it wants, and it's calculating in its head, thrust, angle, right?
The cat is the math brain, and the dog is
So-
the other brain.
So then, is it possible that a dog could be a poet?
I would say
More
yes.
so, because they're great observers.
Yes, they're great observers, and they can't help but show their emotions.
Oh yeah.
A cat will not let on that they love you until they absolutely must. And so yeah, no, it's so funny. We have 3 cats. I live with my fiance. We have 3 cats now. I have been a lifelong dog person. And so when we got our first cat, I was like, all right, we'll see how this goes. And he is extremely intelligent. Like I've never met a cat like this before. And so I was like, all right, is this what cats are like? And then we got Maury last year, and she's just she's a silly little thing. And so I'm like, okay, no, not all cats are like this.
Yeah.
And then we have a baby, Stevie. He's wandering around here somewhere. He's only like 3 months old. And he's the same. He's less affectionate than Morrigan is. So he's just as crazy, but with half the sweetness. And so I'm like, okay, you're gonna be my troublemaker. You're my destructive force.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but every dog I've ever met has been, just a delight. And so yes, I think they could definitely be poets.
Yeah, because I see Daisy's face sometimes, and I swear, like I would love to hear her voice.
Yes.
I would love to hear her speak, because
Yep.
it looks like like she's just every
It's
fiber
right
of her
there.
being. Yeah, it's like I'm seriously on the tip of her tongue.
Yep.
And sometimes so based on this crazy concept of can a cat be a poet, can a dog be a poet, is it about empathy? Is that what it comes down to?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it is empathy, and humility too. Like, I know I'm the poet laureate of the city of New Bedford, and like I'm always like, oh, like thanks for talking about it. Like don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm out there being like, yes, I am your public representative for poetry. But you have to bring it down that your art form is it should be accessible for everyone. And so your empathy needs to come in where, okay, how do I talk about this in a way that someone else is going to understand emotionally? And then your humility needs to come in where you can't try to be the smartest person in the room. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like, yes, all these big, beautiful words, but don't throw them all in one poem so that no one can read it, and figure out what you're talking about. And so I think it's the flipping of the coin here. Not that they're mutually exclusive, but I do think if you don't have the empathy already learned in, or kind of ingrained in you, then it becomes very difficult to bring the humility in as well.
So you then, if I'm hearing correctly, you would prefer to have your work celebrated versus you being celebrated.
Exactly. I want you to read my stuff and go, wow, that's a beautiful poem.
Mm-hmm.
And then yes, you can go, who wrote it? And be impressed with me. But I don't want me to be the main focus. Which is what not to bash him, but if you think of like Jack Kerouac, And
He's my
those guys,
cousin, by the way. I'm serious.
really,
Yeah, I forgot how many times removed, but he's my cousin. Yeah.
that's cool. He's he's a cool dude. I will give you that. He's a cool dude. But the antics became more important than the poetry for a lot of those like beat guys. You know, they became these wild west figures as opposed to a poet. And I love that.
Ginsberg. I mean, Ginsberg. I
Yeah.
mean, they all were that way. And
Mhm.
keep going back to those archetypes, the
Yes.
tortured artist, the sensitive artist. Jack was an alcoholic. I mean, just plain and simple. And,
Right.
and so was Charles Bukowski. But
Yeah.
Charles Bukowski celebrated his alcoholism and celebrated his recovery, and and he pulled no punches. And
There's no love lost between me and Bukowski. I'm not a fan. I'm not a
but
fan at all.
I remember, because I'm old enough to be the Dobie Gillis show, which you got to Google that. Dobie Gillis. Bob Denver played he was the beat poet. And it was bizarre because everybody wore black and had black berets, and everybody went to cafes and they had poetry slams and folk music, and no one applauded. They just snapped their fingers, instead of applauding.
Yeah.
And it was very cool. Everybody was a hep cat, and it was,
Yep.
and I think probably that also added to the problem
Right. Makes it
of
seem
poetry not
unapproachable.
being taken seriously.
It also makes it wildly unapproachable. And,
Right.
Kind of like, if you're not into that, if you don't think it's cool, you're like, well, that's weird and too much for me. And you're not
Right.
going to go to that open mic because
Yeah.
it's all those weirdos in berets.
Yeah, what's an espresso? What's grass? I don't know what that is. I'm supposed to smoke that.
Yeah.
And then there was that liberalism thing and communism and the McCarthy.
That I can get behind.
Yeah, the McCarthy un-American,
Right.
Senate hearings.
Mhm.
So all those things have come to bear. So let's bring it down to now, because you mentioned Cape Verdean or Black poets specifically. I just found out the other day that I become more and more impressed with the Cape Verdean community. I've
Mm.
always known about the incredible jazz musicians. Photography is another area that the community excels at. And then I also have heard that poetry is a thing. But then again, the Portuguese connection. I mean, there's that Portuguese soul. There's that it is as important as blood or water
Mhm.
to express yourself. I mean, my mother was a fado singer, which fado is pretty much incredible poetry.
Mhm.
So bringing it down to today, what are the inroads that you feel that you are a part of, and what are the challenges that you feel that, oh gosh, I've only got how many more much time you have left for your what is it called, your term, your
Oh, my
tenure?
term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another year.
Another year. So
Another year.
can you hack away at some of these challenges? How much can you do in a year's time with some of the challenges? So
Yeah.
I know it's a big multifaceted question, but go for it.
It is. And so, I mean, it was part of my, it's been part of my mission in this kind of, appointment, that I wanted to bring all those little bubbles together. And, because we have so many, we have these different facets of poetry. We have the, different artists, different groups that are all working together, but we all have our own little silos. And so what kind of, what kind of art could we make if we all tried to come together? And the challenge, of course, is time and money and getting the word out. For instance, I've been hosting my open mic at the Co-Creative Center for quite a while now. I think, well, we're in our 5th year of existence. Of course, 2 of those were on Zoom over the pandemic, but we host monthly on AHA nights. And the struggle to get that out there, to that there is a free open mic monthly for you to come hang out. It's at the Co-Creative Center. You know, it's in like a gallery or the classroom of the Co-Creative,
Mhm.
which then doesn't, you know, it doesn't involve bars, it doesn't involve buying something, it doesn't involve admission. You know, like there's so many barriers that are not there with the Co-Creative, but there's the barrier of just no, like getting it on people's radars. And so for instance, I know a local group, La Soul Renaissance, just hosted a Cape Verdean poets festival. It was a full night of Cape Verdean poetry and music.
Eric Andrade was involved in
Eric
that,
Andre,
correct? Yeah.
yes, yes. Um, which he and I haven't connected. We're in two different circles and we haven't connected yet. And even though we're both, you know, we're both New Bedford poets. And
Yeah.
so the challenge is, you know, but the reason I missed the festival was because I'm working. I was working that night. And it's just, it's such a struggle to, you know, we're all working full time. We're all trying to do this as a passion, you know. It's, I don't think it's paying anybody's bills at this point. But uh I guess, I don't know, it's outreach and it's breaking down those barriers for people to get to you, but it's also welcoming them in. And so I think that is mostly what I'm going to work on in this last year, is trying to be that kind of welcome committee and bring people in. So I'm gonna make it to a La Soul Renaissance event. I'm gonna pull people in to, you know, work with me on stuff. I just did an event with the Whaling Museum, where we had it was me and like 3 other poets reading in different galleries in the Whaling Museum, and that was fantastic. It was for their first Fridays.
Mhm.
It was a fantastic event, and you know, it took I you know, I had like a week to organize it, which was not enough
Mhm.
time. But extending the invite to poets outside of my friends list, right? I mean, I had a couple of my friends, but extending the invite out to people outside of just poets that I'm friends with,
Mhm.
and pulling them in. And so you know, I need to practice that more, is reaching out saying, hey, I'm doing this, will you come hang out, will you come be a part of it? I also work with the New Bedford Art Museum on a monthly slam, which is more structured. There's judges, you get feedback on your performance. That's the last Wednesday of every month. So depending on when you're releasing this, the next one is July 26th. But the
Yeah.
end of the month, end of month slam poetry. And that has been like that has been the community uh um what do I want to say, the community moment that I've wanted to see. We get poets from different styles, different genres, um different cities. Like we've had a couple people come from Brockton and other far-flung places. And it's incredible to see the talent that is right here, you know, that's at home. And they've found a place to share their art. And so it's been awesome. I mean, we've had poets as young as like high school age poets to um, women in their 70s reciting their poetry that they wrote 40 years ago.
Mhm.
Like it's been incredible. So that has really boosted my
Yeah.
my energy for exactly what I said, pulling in those different bubbles
Yeah.
and hopefully making us one big happy bubble here in New Bedford.
Well, time to do a documentary on that then, because I think the documentary does 2 things. One of it, it documents the activity, and
Mm,
number 2, it acts as a promotional tool for
mm,
future activities. In fact, one of the things, you know, in discussion with you, I'm thinking, I would love to see to a pictures at an exhibition concept. So basically, there's a call for artists put their work in. There's size restrictions, medium, so on and so forth. And then at the exact same time, there's a call for poets. And what happens? And again, just thinking off the top of my head, the poets now will grab a number out of a hat. Each number corresponds to a particular painting. They have enough time to look at the work even before the show is hung, because now, with imagery and so on and so forth. And now they can write a poem based on that particular painting. It's a long shot. Okay, so I'm a poet, and my first vibe that I got off of this piece of work was it's about unrequited love, so on and so forth. And the painter goes, nah, just my cat. But
Yep.
but you have to take that into consideration as well, because and I've mentioned Ernst Gombrich, who did the story of art. He's a phenomenal art historian. He passed away just a few years ago, well into his 90s. He's had something called, it's the beholder's share. It's just like, I guess, the same thing with the listener's share. You can have a poem that you wrote with a specific intent, and yet someone in the audience, or a majority in the audience, is taking it to another level you never imagined. You just flicked all those doors, the windows open in their heads, and now they're saying, hey, look what you did. And you're going, oh my gosh, Same thing with the work. I think it would be such a cool thing to have these poets looking at work and saying, and just going for it. What did they get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole style of poetry. It's called ekphrastic poetry.
Ekphrastic.
Ekphrastic. Yep.
I don't think I've ever said that word in my life.
It is a style. It's a genre where, yes, you are inspired by physical fine art that you've seen, and you're writing a poem either in response to it or in theme with it. So for instance, I wrote one a while ago. It's the dance at Bulgrave. It's the couple, and they're dancing. The man's wearing a hat that kind of like shields his face, and he looks like he's turning in to kiss her. And the woman's
they look like they're almost in the mid spin, and he's taking that momentum literally and figuratively.
Right. But she's got this beautiful little kind of coy smile, and she's blushing. And for me, I wrote that poem as these two, and if you look at the piece in person, it's in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the actual original. The background is just these, you can tell there's people back there, but they're all in shades of kind of blue and gray, and so the couple is the only thing in full vivid color. And for me, that just spoke to a moment where you're dancing with someone you love, and everything just blurs all together, and you two are the only real live, in living color things in the room. And so that was the basis of my poem, was the the kind of moment where you realize you're in color with someone. And
no, it's and that's exactly, because I also think too, and based on what you said, now imagine if was it Monet or Manet who did that one? I think it may have been Manet.
Manet, yeah.
It was Manet. And this is probably somebody going to be out there screaming, "No, it's somebody else." But imagine them being around and now listening. And that's the other thing. The other piece is now the artist gets to hear it. I mean, we have a group of people who have been painting since 1975. We were the graduating class of 1975. And it's weird. We get together quarterly, and there's always seems to be this theme that no one has come up with. And this last theme, and I use that word loosely, everyone was in a state of not so much flux, but a state, because it's different from transition, because they were in this transitory phase, but having no idea. They knew something was going on. They couldn't control it. It wasn't creative block. It was just this momentum, and sometimes to hear someone speak about your work,
Mm.
they're looking at it with the eyes that it's very hard to judge the actions of your children because they're too close to you.
Exactly.
Oh, not my child.
You are too attached. Exactly.
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 So it's that disattachment, and I think that would make for a pretty cool thing. So what are you going to do after this term as the city's official poet laureate?
Fade back into obscurity. No. I hope to continue and help my predecessor make the most of their term.
Oh, your successor, you mean?
Oh, my successor. I'm sorry, my predecessor. Oh, sorry. There we go with those words. My successor, and help them in the way that that my predecessor has helped me.
Right.
Patricia Gomes is an advocate for local poets, and she is fantastic. And so she was, deeply encouraging to me in a time when I really started taking my art and my expression of my art seriously about 8-9 years ago. And Patricia was there to say, "Yep, you're doing great, kid." Like, and that's what it took. It took someone a little more experienced and a little more sure of
mature.
themselves. Exactly.
Yeah.
And more sure of themselves in their art and their expression to tell me that I was on the right path and that I was getting my message across. And then she was deeply encouraging for me to apply for the Poet Laureateship. And so having that vote of confidence from someone that I already admired was pivotal to me having the nerve to even go for this. And so if I can, pass the baton and give that vote of confidence to someone else, that would make it worth it. If I don't bring those little bubbles together by the end of my term, if I can at least boost somebody else up the ladder and help them, then I've done a good job.
I think it's also about time that someone do a compilation, a collection of featured works by the poet laureates as far back as you can find them. Because I think it'll give people like a foothold. It'll give an idea of what is going on. And another final note. There was, when I was at SMU, the predecessor to the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, there was a collection of poetry every year called Temper. And I'm almost wondering, is that still available? Is it in the archives? Because it'd be really great to see how it's evolved, the evolution of poetry. And it was a pretty cool thing. I mean, we're talking, these little booklets were hand set, typed, and printed on printing machines back in those days.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm sort of curious about that. Well, we've got to wrap it up. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with?
Come to open mic. We host every second Thursday of the month. It's AHA night. So our next one is August 10th. And then I believe August 10 and September 14. So come see us. We are no judgment, no style restrictions, no no form restrictions. Just come, bring your best self and bring your work. We'd love to hear you. I also work with a couple of other poets. We're called Anomaly Poetry, and we publish 2 anthologies every year. So there's opportunity to, vocalize your art. There's also opportunity to publish your art. So we highly encourage you to get involved. We're on Instagram at anomaly.poetry, and that's where we update about most of our stuff. And we are passionate about publishing and amplifying new voices and the voices that maybe don't have the encouragement yet to get up there. So we are extremely open to newbies, and also extremely open to folks who've been doing this for a while.
Oh,
So
that's great, because one of our
Yeah.
plans is we're considering getting a podcast host that focuses strictly on poetry. So that that particular individual can document, I mean, been trying to lasso Everett Hoagland for
Professor Hoagland, yeah,
Hoagland, yeah, for, I mean, he's not an easy.
he's
an easy,
busy.
yeah, he's very busy.
He's,
Yeah,
he's still generating books worth of poems. Like he's
right.
incredible. He's incredible.
But there's, so that legacy, that history, I think that's, part and parcel of what we're doing. We're trying to provide a platform for artists to bookmark themselves in a page in history. And, the history of the creative community of the South Coast. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful. I am really inspired by this whole thing, because there's a lot of things swirling through my head, especially now the pictures at an exhibition kind of concept. I think that might be able to fly, and I think
Yeah,
it could even
let
be
me
a
know.
grantable event. Yeah. We'll talk about
Let
that.
me know. Absolutely.
So with that in mind, folks, we've been speaking with Sarah Mulvey, the Poet Laureate of New Bedford, who is on duty for another year out of her 3 years. And we hope you've enjoyed the show. And with that in mind, thank you for joining us, and see you next time on the In Focus podcast. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.